Look at the title of the passage before you start reading. Sometimes they'll stick the answer to the question right in the title of the passage itself. Also, look for places within the passage where words that are used in the title show up, and sometimes that'll help you out. It's really easy to just start reading and jump in when that time's ticking down and not even look at the title, but trust me, you'll want to take a second and just make sure you read that before you jump in. Also, don't forget to look at the images and the text below the images, the captions. Sometimes, again, when that time gets ticking down and that stress of the test takes over, it's really easy to just go right past those images, but just take a second to check those out and read the text below them too, because sometimes they'll stick an answer to one of the questions right there. Another tip is to watch for places in the passage where lists show up. And obviously you're not going to have time to remember everything that's on those lists, but just note for where those lists show up. In case you get a question, you can just go back to the passage and find the list, and the information you need should hopefully be right there. It can be really hard to keep your focus when you're reading, especially when you're in that test and you've got the stress of that test taking situation. So one tip I have for you is to practice reading, and especially practice focusing while you're reading. Now, you can do this in as little as 20-25 minutes a day. If that's all you have, that's fine. Grab something to read, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a book. You can go to the library, you can find something online. There's plenty of places you can read articles and news for free on the internet. Whatever you want to read doesn't really matter, but what I recommend is go somewhere quiet. I know it's hard if you've got kids in the house, but go somewhere and try to put a timer on for 20 minutes or 25 minutes and just try to read and try as hard as you can to just keep your focus on nothing but that reading during that 25-minute period. And it's hard to do, and what I recommend is just keep a sheet of paper by you, and just every time your mind wanders, just put a little tally on that sheet of paper. And at first it might be pretty bad, but if you keep practicing, hopefully over time you'll note that you're making less tallies on the paper, meaning that you're staying focused longer. Another tip is to know as much as you can about that test before you go into the test taking situation. GED RLA is a 150-minute long test. Now you'll have 45 minutes for that essay, and you'll have about 46 questions on the multiple choice section to answer, and you're going to have about 2 minutes and 16 seconds for each question. Another tip I have for you is to pause every now and then while you're reading and try to make a prediction about what's going to happen. Now, you'll have to use your own judgment, because obviously if you do this too often, you're going to take away a lot of time that you need to answer those questions. But just stopping every now and then and trying to make a prediction, maybe when you're practicing for your 20-25 minutes, what you can even do is stop and try to think about a couple different outcomes that are possible. Maybe list 2 or 3 different outcomes on a sheet of paper that you think are possible. And this really is going to help your reading comprehension. So similarly is to pause every now and then when you're reading and ask if what you're reading makes sense. And also try to pause and try to restate what's happening in the story in your own words. This is proven to help boost reading comprehension. And this is similar to if you've ever watched a TV show or a movie and you see your friend the next day and they say, wow, what happened in the episode last night, or what happened in that movie? And you explain the plot of the movie or TV show to your friend. That's all this means. Just practice pausing every now and then and try to explain what's happening in the story in your own words. That's one of the most powerful tips for boosting reading comprehension that I know. So one really good strategy to go into your test with, particularly for fiction passages, but you can also use this sometimes for a nonfiction passage depending on what it is, but it's what I like to call the SCCT method. Now the S stands for setting. What is the setting of the story? Where is the story taking place, and when is it taking place? Now, oftentimes in the first paragraph, they'll come right out and tell you where the story is taking place and when, but that won't always be the case. Sometimes it'll be further down in the story. And this is really important because they might ask you point blank, what is the setting of the story? All right, those kinds of questions are a fair game and they do come up, but it's also important for your reading comprehension and your understanding. All right, if the story is taking place on a farm somewhere versus in a busy city, can't you see how, the way that you picture the story is going to be completely different based off of where the setting of the story is. So it is really, really important to consider what that setting is. And it's also important too, because if you go into that test, all right, a lot of people are going to be nervous. They're going to have a lot on the line. It's going to be a stressful situation. It's just having a plan. You're going to go in, and the first thing you're going to look for when you're reading a fiction passage is the setting. Then you're going to identify the characters. Just going in with a plan can sometimes really help your confidence and help you score better. So first, find that setting. And that's what the S stands for. The first C stands for characters, all right? Now, there are going to be, in a lot of fiction stories, there's going to be supporting characters and there are going to be main characters. Now, the main characters are the people that the story is about, right? It's going to come up again and again and again. And the supporting characters, they're just kind of there. They might have a role that kind of moves the plot along, but they're not the main crew. It might even help to make a list of the characters, and then next to each character on your list, just jot down a word or two to help you remember that person, all right? Because not keeping track of the characters is, and it's hard to do when you've got that time ticking down on the test, but not being able to keep track of the characters is a big reason, in my opinion, that students sometimes struggle with reading comprehension fiction passages. So the third C in SCCT stands for conflict, and the T stands for theme, all right? So the theme is just the message that the writer wants to communicate to you. It's often going to be a statement about human nature or human behavior, and oftentimes if you really nail down what the setting is and look for places in the story where the setting changes, and you figure out the characters and you pay close attention to the interactions between those characters, where do they agree, where do they disagree, where do they have conflict, the conflict and the theme of the story are just going to kind of jump out at you a lot of times. One of the most powerful reading comprehension strategies that I know is called rap paraphrasing, and this is a method developed by Shoemaker, Denton, and Deschler, and there's a lot of benefits to using the strategy, but basically the way it works, and you can do this while you're doing your practice reading, R stands for read the paragraph. So you read the paragraph, and then A stands for ask what's the main idea in 2 supporting ideas, and the P stands for put it in your own words. Now, if you're wondering what is the main idea, that's actually a really important concept to understand because you might get some questions asking point blank what's the main idea. But anyway, it's the main point of a paragraph, or it can be the main point of the whole passage. Now, it's often going to be found right in one sentence near the beginning of the passage, but that's not always going to be the case. Repetition of an idea that is brought up over and over again can sometimes be a clue as to what the main idea is. But one of the most powerful ways to identify the main idea is to read the paragraph or passage and then stop and ask yourself, if this were a movie or a story or a book, what title would I give this paragraph? So ask that question, what title would I give this paragraph or passage? And that can often help you figure out what the main idea is. Now, supporting ideas support that main idea. So the main idea is like the table, and the supporting ideas are like the legs that hold up the table. And basically, these can be facts, these can be examples, this can be data, just things that support that main idea. And paraphrasing, as we've talked about, is just a fancy way of saying put things in your own words. And this alone, if you take nothing else away from this RAP strategy, it's important to know to be able to identify main ideas and supporting ideas, and also to just get some practice with putting ideas in your own words. Do you support any sports teams? All Pittsburgh teams, Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pitt basketball? What animals have you seen in the wild? Probably the coolest was a coyote I saw in Minneapolis. It wasn't really in the wild, it was just kind of at a park in the city. What pictures did you used to have on your bedroom walls? I used to have a Kurt Cobain picture on my wall. What's the biggest thing you could do to improve your health? Stop eating so much junk food, but I'm still kind of working on it. How many pairs of shoes do you have? I only have 2 or 3 right now. What was your favorite TV show when you were a child? Probably Hey Arnold. How much coffee do you drink? Right now, I'm down to 2 cups a day, but I've been cutting back for a while. So I always recommend, really for every section of the test, whether it's science, whether it's social studies, especially on RLA, is use process of elimination. Get rid of answer choices that you don't think are right. A lot of times on the test, unfortunately, there might be multiple answer choices that seem like they could be right, all right? And in many cases, some of the multiple answer choices look like they could be right, so you're kind of picking which one you think is the best answer choice. And it really helps if you can eliminate answer choices that are just junk answer choices that don't make sense. Another tip is to try to look for words that match the passage, right? So maybe this will be in the answer choices, maybe this will be in the question. Here's an example for you to see on the screen here, but basically look for words in sentences and phrases in the passage that match answer choices. Sometimes those answer choices are going to be right. It's not a guarantee, but it's just something to watch out for. I've seen on real GED practice questions made by the testing service, I've seen that they do this sometimes, so just something to keep in mind. Hopefully you won't have to guess too much on your test, but if you do, one trick you can use to try to get more answers right is to look for the longest answer choice, the one with the most words, the one that has the most detailed and specific phrases, and that's often the one that you want to guess. Now, there's no guarantee this isn't always going to work. It's always better if you could just use your critical thinking skills and just reason your way through the questions, but if you do have to guess, this is something you can try. And the reason that I think this works is because oftentimes the test writers, they will put a lot of effort into writing the correct answer choice, and then they get a little lazy and they just kind of want to go home and get their paycheck and they don't care that much. So the other answer choices will just be like 2 or 3 words because they don't put that much effort into them. But the one that's actually right will have way more words and it'll be a lot longer. All right. So again, that's not always going to work, but if you do have to guess and you've got nothing else, that's what I recommend guessing. SQR3 is a really successful reading comprehension technique. The original method, the S stands for survey, and you want to survey that text before reading to understand the topic and the main idea. Also, look at the title and headings, and also survey those pictures and graphics, anything that is shown and given to you. And also, sometimes you can look at the introduction and the conclusion. You can kind of look at a paragraph and look at the first sentence, look at the last sentence. You can also look at the first paragraph and skim that, and then look at the last paragraph and skim that, and that can also be a way to survey. And the whole point of surveying is just to kind of get your mind thinking about what the passage is going to be about. Sometimes you can even identify what that main idea is or what the purpose of the passage is before you even start reading. And the Q stands for questions. So you want to write down any questions that you have from your survey. So again, you look at that title, you look at the headings, you look at pictures, just kind of skim it quickly and think, what do I know about this? What don't I know about this? Just write down any questions that you have from your survey. All right, and this kind of helps you focus on the main ideas as you read. Then you're going to recite, which is kind of what we've already talked about with paraphrasing. You're just going to kind of look away from the text and try to put it in your own words. Now, obviously, if you're actually taking the test at your home, like you're taking it online or something, and they're recording you through the screen, you don't want to look away. You could get in trouble for doing that on your test, but you get kind of the point here, hopefully. But reciting helps boost your memory. It helps you figure out what you're not understanding, right? If you're having a lot of trouble putting stuff in your own words, all right, that might be because you don't fully understand the passage yet. And it also helps you answer those questions. Now, the third R would be review what you've learned. And if nothing else, one takeaway you can take from this video is before you just jump in and start reading, look at the title, look at the pictures, just kind of skim the passage for anything interesting that jumps out at you. And a lot of people don't do this, but it's a really good habit to get into and it can boost your score. I'm excited to announce that this video's champion shoutout goes to a test taker who says, I got 180s on every subject apart from math, but when tragedy struck, I gave up for over a year and a half. However, in early December, I was encouraged to finish the GED and schedule the test 2 weeks later. And the test taker goes on to say, opportunities have really opened up for me. Rest assured, you can take a generously long amount of time between tests and still pass. For me, the best amount of time was about a month of watching videos for each subject. Fun tip is you can pause the video and use the Windows snipping tool to try practice questions with the pen. And 180s are some of the highest scores I've ever seen, so I want to give this test taker a big congratulations. Having a plan in place for how you're going to approach the questions on your test is really important. And one baseline strategy that I recommend for at least most students, at least when you're starting out, is to just go in there, look at the title first, look at any pictures, maybe look at the questions quickly before you actually start reading, and then just jump in and start reading the passage and just read it from top to bottom, just read straight through it. Try to pay attention closely as you read, try to understand what's happening. Don't worry about memorizing or remembering the details, just try to follow along what's happening in the story, and look for things like the setting and the characters as you're reading. And then when you answer the questions, if you get to a question and you can't remember the answer because it's something detailed, go back and find the part of the passage that has the answer to that question, and then that's what I recommend most people do, at least starting out. That's what I consider kind of the standard approach. Now, another approach is what I like to call the seek and destroy method. And basically what this involves is you just go to the questions and you just read the question and you go and you skim and you scam through the passage until you find the part of it that has the answer to that question, all right? This can be highly effective, but it can also be quite stressful. Questions that ask things like, what is the correct order of events in the passage? It's hard to beat those by using seek and destroy. Some of those questions are kind of written to prevent you from using that method, but you can get a lot of questions right that way if you're good at it. A lot of students discover this method when the time's ticking down and they realize they don't have time to read the whole passage. Another tip is to constantly ask questions as you're reading. The more that you can think deeply, whether you find the answers to those questions or not, but just by asking the questions helps you process and think more deeply about the text, which is going to boost your reading comprehension and memory when it comes time to answering those questions. Test taking anxiety is really common, and I think that most people are going to have some level of anxiety or nervousness about the test. That's perfectly normal. But if while you're taking the test you feel like you've got a lot of anxiety, or if you find yourself starting to panic, which is really easy to do, what I recommend is to just pause for a moment or two and just take some deep breaths and cheer yourself on in your own head. Tell yourself you can do it. Tell yourself you're going to do great on the test, regardless of how well you think you're doing at the time. And just kind of feel your feet against the ground and just reconnect to that present moment. Just try to reground yourself back in the present. But if you can do that and you just take it one question at a time, try not to worry so much about how well you're doing during the test. I've heard a lot of test takers say that they swore they were going to fail, they thought they were going to fail, and then they ended up passing. So you never know. Just take each question one question at a time. Don't worry about what's coming next. Try not to beat yourself up if you feel like you've got a lot of questions wrong. Just tell yourself, I'm going to get this next question right, or at least you're going to try your best to get the next question right. Hopefully you'll end up doing well anyway.